So my name is Jo Axe. I'm a professor in the School of Education and Technology. I've been working at RU for, I think, 19 years at this point. Associate faculty earlier, and then moving into a whole bunch of different positions as we went further down the years. And now we're in 2019. Okay, so I'm going to pass it over to Theresa to introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Theresa Bell. I'm the manager of Blended Learning Success. I've been at the university for, I guess it's 16 years now, so around for a while.
I'm just thinking we should probably stand where the camera is so folks can see us. I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves. So I'm going to pass the mic over to you if you could hand it down. And we have one panel member who's online. So hopefully we can get that screen up for folks who are online as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. So Cheryl Hickoop in the School of Leadership Studies, the program head for the MA Leadership Program, and I was also a student in the doctoral program here at Royal Roads.
Thanks. I'm Jean Slick. I'm a professor in the School of Humanitarian Studies. I teach in the Disaster and Emergency Management program.
And I'm Todd Thexton. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Business. I'm also the program head of the Bachelor of Business Administration program and one of 2 directors of the School of Business.
I'm Mary Bernard. I'm professor in the College for Interdisciplinary Studies, and I'm with the doctoral program in social sciences. It's a program I helped to create.
I'm Mickey Noble. I'm one of the science professors here at Royal Roads, and I teach in the environmental science program, and I'm the program head for that program.
Yeah. So I just wanted to acknowledge the traditional lands of the Cumberland Consulting peoples and take a couple of seconds here to think about where we all are. At RU, I'm looking out at the beautiful mountains outside. Hopefully everybody is somewhere with a view, and just want to express my own personal gratification for being able to live and work in this environment and learn and all those great things. Thank you.
My turn. So just a very quick overview then of what we're talking about today. We're going to look at both the goals and the outcomes for this session. That's kind of what we're doing right now. Looking at what the literature says, also some information about what Railroad students tend to say about this topic. We're then going to get to hear what our panelists have to say. And there will be time after that for discussion and conversation around not only what the panelists have said, but if members of our audience also have strategies or suggestions that they would like to provide. And then at the end, we'll have time for some remaining questions. And all of that wrapping up by 1 o'clock, because I know some of our panelists have places they have to be by that time. So that's the time frame we're working on. You can move the things forward. Great, thank you. So in terms of what we're hoping will happen out of this session, really our goal is to give people a kind of a buffet, if you will, of information. There's Jenny. Hello. Can you hear us?
Oh, hi. Yeah, I can. Yes.
Hello. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
All right. My name is Zheng Yi Li. I'm a professor from School of Communication and Culture, and mainly teaching courses related to intercultural communication. Nice to see you here.
Great. Thank you, Zheng Yi. So as I was saying, we're hoping to just have a conversation here that allows people to discuss some of the things that they find helpful in terms of communicating expectations for writing. Really, assignment descriptions often have quite a focus on what content is necessary. There may be less information provided on what other kind of considerations should students be thinking about in terms of structure, layout. There's a whole lots of other things. So just really trying to get some of that information out there to give people some ideas of what options they might have of new strategies they can integrate. And here's Eugene. Thanks for joining us. We're just going over the goals. I'll move into the outcomes then. So in terms of our specific outcomes, after taking part in the session, it is our hope that audience members will be able to better understand the importance of providing clear expectations about writing, as well as identify and use a variety of strategies and resources that will assist in explaining expectations to students. So Joe. Yes, Eugene, would you like to introduce yourself to everybody?
Hi there, I'm Eugene Tomlinson from the School of Tourism and Hospitality Management. I'm the program head for the undergraduate Bachelor of Arts in Global Tourism Management.
Great. So what we did at first, before we start the panel discussion, we just wanted to ground it a little bit in some of the literature that is being written around this topic. There doesn't appear to be a lot that's very specific to writing, unfortunately. There's a lot about expectations, communicating expectations and evaluating, but not so much about specifically writing. So I have highlighted some of the ones that we found. And just to sort of put in a general context, the importance of actually communicating expectations. So making sure that you do let students understand what it is that they're going to be doing, why they're doing it, and how you're going to be assessing them. It's one of those cornerstones of success for a student perspective. So it really is significant to them. And then there's got to be that alignment between what the instructor expects and what the student understands. So trying to make sure excuse me, that those two things are in sync. Okay, great. So there are some things that faculty have said. This particular thing, it's 20 years old. But when I was reading it going, this is still, I'm hearing the same things from students and associate faculty that I discuss things with, core faculty, when we have conversations about this. And I think it's reflected in some of the things that Theresa will be talking about in a little while. So this, trying to step out of our own discipline, we're usually, if you're in business, I've taught in business and I teach in education, and there are different expectations that you place on the students depending on the discipline you're working in. And so this tendency to be influenced by the discipline that you're teaching in and how that impacts the students' writing, I think is fairly significant, and it came out in this piece quite clearly. The other piece about students was that faculty are able to identify when students have been successful, but when it comes to saying about, what do I mean about the structure, there seemed to be that piece was lacking. So that was one of the pieces that I think that I've heard again from students. I've had students tell me that this is completely opposite from what the instructor I had before told me to do. And I'm going, why did they tell you that? I have no idea, and they don't really care. They do want to know what we want ourselves as instructors. So I think that's the important piece from that one. And then there were a few bits and pieces about what the students themselves had done. So the first quotes are again from the article that's 20 years old. They interviewed students directly. It was a fairly small case study, but they'd actually gone and looked at what the students thought about what they were doing, which sometimes we tend to forget. And this is what I think they're thinking, but it's not actually. So they were often unsure and confused about what they'd done wrong. So even when we'd given them the feedback, they still weren't really quite sure where they were going. So that's really important that we tell them up front where we want them to be. Students said that they had difficulty grasping how to write specific course-related things, which relates back to that other comment about being discipline-specific. So what does that instructor want from this course? And frequently, we perhaps perceive that we all want the same thing, but we actually don't. And then this last quote was more recent. But there are commonalities that we expect from students as they're coming into our classrooms that we don't always communicate about what we want them to do with their writing. So the problem, the reasoning, the evidence, rather than their opinions. So the number of conversations I've had with students, even at the end of the program, after having 2 years of being told this, I'm still getting the opinions. And please clarify that's not what we're looking for. So those were some of the things that students in the literature had said, and I think Theresa is now going to tell us what some of our students are saying, and then we'll hand it over to the panel to have a bit more of a conversation.
Thank you. So the perspective that I thought I could bring to this is, what do I hear from students? Because of course those are the conversations that I'm having. And if you can move that forward for me, Joe, thank you. So, the question is often asked, how can I understand what my instructor wants if I'm not told? That question can be asked in various levels of frustration. And the follow-up being that often students don't find out what it is that they're expected to do until they've lost marks because of it. And sometimes that takes an assignment or two to kind of straighten that out. So it's that piece of, certainly encouraging students to ask those kind of questions, but also helping them to understand that there are differences between instructors, and that is just part of writing for a different audience, is figuring out what those differences are. So what I did to prepare for this session, and Joe, if I can get you to bring up that Word document, is just to put together a list of the kinds of questions that students often ask. And my goal for this document was to kind of show it here. So I think that might be, that's not it. It's the other Word document. There we go. So it's called Communicating Expectations for Student Writing. And you may be aware that I publish a writing tip regularly in Crossroads. My thinking of this was to bring it here first and then publish it eventually in Crossroads as a resource that either students could use when they're writing for a new instructor to take to the instructor and say, with respect to this question, what should I do? So to help them think about what kind of questions they want to ask. But also that it might be a useful resource for instructors to be thinking about what kind of information could I be providing to students on these topics that are commonly points of confusion for students. So it's, you'll have a chance to have a look through it, but it's really just looking at things like audience, who am I writing for, what kind of tone should I have? The last bit on the second page is really looking at APA formatting, because that's a common point of discussion around instructors having different expectations around APA, sometimes different understanding around APA, and what instructors actually want students to do. So I won't spend a bunch of time going over this right now, because I want to make sure that our panelists have lots of time for their discussion, but just throwing that out there to say that will be a resource that will be available through Crossroads in the near future. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to our panelists. What I'm going to ask you to do is, if you can kind of keep your comments to 5 minutes or less, just so that we make sure we have time for everyone. I will be timekeeper, so if you see me subtly or not so subtly waving at you. Exactly, yeah, you can wave back, that would be lovely. And I thought we would just go down the panel as you're seated, if that's all right. So Cheryl, would you like to start off?
Absolutely. Thank you. I was really struck by that last comment about I don't actually know what the expectations are until several assignments in. And one of the things in the School of Leadership Studies in the MA Leadership Program is we actually have formative assessments. So students will submit something, they'll receive feedback, so we'll talk about what they've done well on an assignment and what could be improved, and then let them know the grade range and how it meets that grade range, so that they can then work with the Writing Center, work with their learning partners, to improve their writing, so that when they submit their assignment, they know what the expectations are. So that's something that we've done in the School of Leadership Studies for quite a while. And it helps to alleviate some of the anxiety that students are feeling with those first couple of assignments, because you're getting formative assessments, and then you'll get a summative assessment later on that material that you've submitted previously. So that's one tip that seems to work well. And students also read Marshall Goldsmith's Feed Forward article talking about the power of Feed Forward. And Feed Forward supports us to be moving forward. It offers constructive feedback about how to reach our goals. So there we go. There's one.
Thanks. The strategy that I wanted to share is just the use of a rubric. And so I think a lot of people use rubrics. But the way I use a rubric, it comes from the work of Dr. David Bowd from Deakin University in Australia, who runs a center on assessment. And what he recommended, and I've put into practice now, is that both the student and the instructor complete the rubric. So there's an example of a rubric for a final assignment that's being shared. And so I create the rubric, and the students are required to assess themselves. And I break down the criteria and show the grade range for each of those items, and it will all total to 100%. But at the very top, I ask the question, what feedback would be most helpful to you on this assignment? And what I found is that we know that students are at different places in their writing, and as well as their comprehension of the subject matter. And so what this does is the student can say it helps them identify where they're concerned in their writing, and they're already being receptive, so it's easy to give feedback. So I'm trying to get to the space where they want feedback, And it creates this lovely reciprocal piece because they're now asking and then I give. So it's not something that's unexpected. The second thing he said is to focus your feedback in the area where there's a difference between how you assess and the students assess. So by having this kind of rubric where students have to do a self-assessment, if my assessment is the same as theirs, I can write in a comment, I agree with you. And then I really focus my feedback in the area where there's a difference between my feedback and their feedback. And the goal really should be that by the time they graduate from a program, they have their own ability to reflect and critique their work. So I realize there's still a lot of work that I need to do sort of to support that kind of approach within the program as a whole, but within the courses that I teach, I find that students now give me feedback on my course evaluations about the feedback that I give. And I think these tools like this and having them be a partner in that process really help contribute to that.
I'm going to do what Jean does from now on. In the School of Business, I think that we're probably a really good example of what Joe was talking about earlier on, about how there's a real diversity in how we communicate about writing expectations among our faculty, and it's largely because of the differences in disciplinary backgrounds in our past. In the School of Business, we have a large percentage of people that hold applied degrees in practical business areas, and a few with research degrees with very different expectations about what good writing looks like. Theresa, I suspect it was maybe some School of Business students who said we're not really sure what the expectations are because they seem to shift from instructor to instructor. So in the School of Business, I think that's probably been our biggest focus, is how do we get our faculty to use common language in expressing their expectations to students so that students really understand what's expected from them from one course to the next, as opposed to having a variety of different set of standards for each faculty that's there. This is a problem that's been around for some time. I brought one example here from our colleague, Dr. Amy Zadolka in the School of Business, who I think about 7 or 8 years ago created this template for a common language for assessment of writing. And in this, she sort of identifies sort of common areas of writing struggles that students typically have, has kind of given each area a bit of a code word, and then a definition and some examples that go along with that. And this tool was used, when it was being used, it was used to give instructors a shorthand so that we'd all use the same language. So when somebody was being too wordy in their explanations, we could use the word concision, and then the students would be able to look back and understand what exactly it was that we meant by that. So it was efficient for instructors, but it also meant that we were all saying things in exactly the same way. The downside of the common language is that we don't actually all have common expectations around what we want. So the utilization of this as an instrument probably struggled on the implementation side. Recently in the Bachelor of Business Administration program, we've been trying a similar issue, and Joe, maybe if you don't mind, the next slide. We've been using a rubric from the Association of American Colleges and Universities. That association, which consists of hundreds and hundreds of colleges and universities in the US, embarked on a project to create common rubrics in a number of different areas of scholarship through its project called the Values Project, which stands for Valid Assessment of Learning in Undergraduate Education. They created rubrics for written communication, among other things, that in some ways we're using to try and get all of our faculty on the same page with using and understanding, so that students understand what the expectations are. And just very quickly, and I'll pass it on to Mary, AACU standards look at the context and the purpose of writing, for example. So who's the reader and what's the purpose of undertaking the writing? How is the content developed? Does it follow the genre and disciplinary conventions? Does it use proper sources and evidence? And I like this one very much. Does it use graceful language that skillfully communicates meaning to readers? So though it isn't a solution, it is actually one of the ways that we can try and encourage our faculty to be consistent in their messaging to students.
Thank you. As I was thinking about today, I realized that I spent the better part of my academic career actually reviewing, from a critical perspective, other people's writing, whether it was graduate students when I was at York, or here at Royal Roads and York as well, reviewing faculty members' research proposals. So my comment on the sort of the single strategy comment is quite broad-based to sort of capture a range. And well, the first part of that is you have to write, like, you just have to start writing. It sounds so simple, but it's so hard to do. Forget thinking too much and just start doing it. Like, and you can go back after and fix and so on. But in starting to do that, I think the single most important thing is either what is the research question, what is the proposal intent that's given in the guidelines, what is the essay topic. And you want to make sure that you really get it right. And you may consult with, your instructor, or in the case of proposals with the Office of Research, on how, like, did you get it right? Like, really go back and read everything that you can in the guidelines to make sure that it's right, because you'd be quite surprised how often people are just simply off base, right? They think they got it. They think they're answering the question, but they haven't. And they may have written a beautiful essay, but missed the primary point. Once you have that, just start writing and keep writing, and go back after and fix and expand and so on. But do it like there's a laser going through your whole essay or whole funding proposal or thesis or dissertation, where whatever that topic was, that the reader is never not knowing how all of your other information connects. So for example, if it's a thesis, in the purpose, you always go back and you say, is the background, introduction, and purpose clearly aligning with what the question was? When I go to my literature review, am I only dealing with that literature that makes sense in light of this? Leave out the rest. In my methods and methodology and methods, same thing. And in my findings and analysis, often in which your findings are brought up against your literature and your theory, can I easily, in every paragraph, identify my question? And if there's sub-questions, can I identify the relationships among them? And then finally, in your conclusion, but keep, like for Star Wars fans, there's a Darth Vader, and he had his light saber, the laser sharpness that goes through anything, right? And you need that no matter what you're writing. The word I like best is coherence. You bring coherence to the paper regardless.
Okay, so switching gears slightly, science often has the advantage that we have a template, and where our students usually have a problem is actually applying the template. So they don't actually necessarily understand what goes in an introduction versus what goes in the methods section, et cetera. So one of the things that we've done with our bachelor's programs is we actually run a workshop where we talk about what goes in each section. We hand out copies of old student assignments that were, we usually have a good, a bad, and a really ugly version of each, that we ask them to sit down with a partner and, identify what were the good points of that section, what were the bad points of that section, and then we talk about it as a class. And then we have structured their lab assignments so that their first lab assignment is not a complete lab report. You're just writing me an introduction so that I can make sure that you know what goes in an introduction. and what doesn't go in an introduction, and that encyclopedia are not appropriate reference material for university. And Wikipedia is great as a jumping off point, but is also not source material, because they're not good at necessarily judging credible source material at this point. So we're building up over the course of a semester where they hand in these individual sections to a complete lab report at the end of the semester when they've had a chance to see what somebody else did, try it themselves, get feedback on it, and now you're going to put this all together. That for us has been really quite successful and has greatly improved the quality of what comes in, because there's a lot less struggle with expectations and what it is that is supposed to go in those sections. Now, fair enough, this works really well if your discipline has a template. If it doesn't, there's still nothing wrong with the idea of building up to sections, right? Bringing in for formative assessment just the research questions or the research questions in the lit review, so that students can see whether those things are connected or not.
Thank you. When I, got the message about coming in here to talk today, I had a few ideas of my own about, what I thought were the things. And then I actually went to the students and asked them, hey, what's been most effective for you guys? And the first two things actually that came out of their mouths was the writing center. And some people saying, I don't know why I bought the book when I could have just gone to the writing center. So, that's definitely been a huge plus as far as the students understanding what needs to be there and everything like that. The second thing, and this is more of a structural thing than anything, was that we moved our writing and critical thinking course to compress it right at the start of their program. And so, because we were finding that a lot of students were saying, hey, I'm writing this paper, but I don't know about APA, and I won't learn about all the APA stuff until about, October, November. So we've now put it right at the start, and before they have any assignments at all, they are doing the writing and critical thinking and all the APA and everything like that. So that gets done and out of the way. But a few other things that the students mentioned, and some of them have been identified, are things like that clear rubric. A good example, they want to see what would be an A paper and why that paper. We'll get people that say, hey, why don't you let us do one assignment, because, different instructors have different perspectives and things like that. Why don't we get one quick assignment that's hardly worth anything, that we have a chance to get some feedback and see what does that mean and what is a good paper for this particular instructor. So it's all those little things that come together that we're finding. And with our program, we're still fixing and changing and taking the feedback and things like that. So I don't know that we will ever come up with the one silver bullet. So that's why sessions like this are great too, to get other ideas on what we can incorporate, and that sort of continuous improvement. We don't have it until never. So, thanks.
Thank you. Eugene, can I get you to pass with the microphone, let Jenny know that it's his turn?
Oh.
Okay. Yeah, this is Zheng Yi, and agree very much of you, your comments. I made a small slide, my ABCD I usually share with my students. The only, basically in intercultural courses, many things are very much personal, and also I like to let them reflect deeper and relate very much to their personal experience. And I teach theory courses, but I like to have them apply those theories and internalize into their professional practice and also personal life. that's why in many of my courses, I require them to write a letter to their grandma. And so that when I tell them like what to do in that assignment, we usually will emphasize, consider your audience is your grandma. So you have to put everything in very much like lay language, and better you read out your assignment by yourself. I find this is a very helpful technique. The students agree with me that typing into a computer is very different from reading out their letter to their grandma. And of course, I agree with all of you here. Cohesion and coherence is important. I usually limit the assignment word into within like 1,000 words or even shorter, because I said, if you write for 2 or more pages still without a clue what is it about, why bother, you write a long passage. So I usually emphasize, quality over quantity of the words. And I give them the suggestion that whenever they are not sure about what I'm asking them to do, they please ask me again and again, because part of this exercise is intercultural communication. I'm from my culture, they are from their culture, and misunderstanding is inevitable, and part of the intercultural research is to find a way to resolve misunderstanding. And I ask them to revise again and again the same assignment in the same course. So don't worry about the first assignment, because they have opportunities to revise, and they help each other to revise. That's the collaboration I meant here. And also I encourage them to submit their paper. Some students will say, hey, look, like this is a kind of a A+ assignment. I said, for sure, I will give you A+ if a journal accepts your paper. Just read journal articles, read published books, and match that. So like many of you experienced, they ask, what is an A+ paper? I said, no, you can find those in our library. And those are the models, and those are the benchmarks. So, and also, I felt many times the students are so anxious that they really cannot think. So, in my tagline for almost all the courses I'm teaching is relax and drink, not the reverse order. So I ask them just to, whenever they start to write assignment, relax. They are capable to do that. They have resources. Don't worry. And the drink stands for keep take care of themselves, and don't forget they have life. Assignment is only one small piece in their study, and so particularly drink water. Okay, so I think. That's a quick summary on what I try to clearly communicate my expectation for students' writing. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very enlightening. Some great comments and different strategies and humor and all kinds of great things going on there. What we've done now is, hopefully, we've got the next slide. It just says discussion. So it's a general discussion with the panelists. We have a few people online. So while we only have a few people face-to-face, there are more online. Are there any questions from the folks online? I'm just going to give them a couple of minutes in case somebody wants to type their questions. If anybody has any questions for our panelists about some of the strategies they were doing, how they work, anybody got anything they would like to comment on? If not, we have some backup questions, and I also have a whole bunch of questions for things that you were saying, so this could go on for hours, actually. I promise it won't. Do you want to just pull up the questions that we had? Because we had a couple of things that we were curious what your thoughts are on these. So the first one is, when students start writing for you, how do you communicate what you expect from their writing that could be different from other instructors? So it's not only what you want, but what could be different Because there are some things that students tend to, I have found, especially the structure of the actual paper seems to be the thing that they focus on. And I know FOM for a long time, years ago, had a format template they used to give to the students. I don't know if that's still the case, Todd? No. So how do you communicate things differently? And there's a couple of mics on the table if anybody would like to join the conversation. Down at the bottom.
The other bottom. Yeah, good. I'm going to go back to that whole idea of just starting writing. I tell people that even if they only have 5 minutes or so, or 10 minutes, just start and send it to me, no matter what shape it's in. Like, just get started. I find it's one of the biggest barriers is not getting started and trying to think things through. And I don't know if that's, I think it's different because I think most instructors want students to get started, but I actually want them to send me it, no matter how bad or good they think it is. And that's usually because, I'm speaking primarily at the independent study and major paper and thesis level. It's usually preceded by a conversation by Skype or in person or telephone first, where we talk about the question, the independent study question or the literature review. And so hopefully by the end of that, they have a pretty good expectation of what my expectation is around the question itself, regardless if it's a proposal or a thesis or dissertation or independent study.
I guess, and this kind of touches on some of the things that other people have talked about and that, but because being in the School of Tourism and Hospitality Management, thinking about the audience that you're writing for is so important, so that at times the APA isn't what you need to create, because you're possibly doing a briefing note that you would be doing in a government purpose. Or, so that's where we really do have to stress sometimes, and it's not necessarily a difference between me and other instructors, but it's more between the different assignments. You know, this assignment, this is your audience, and really trying to be clear with every assignment who your audience is, you know, whether it's the deputy minister or apparently grandma. So wanting to be very clear about that and how that will impact on the assignment and the way you write it.
That works nicely with the next question that we had, because the expectation for writing in different types of assignments. So you brought it up quite nicely there by saying that one course can have many different types of communication in it. So how do we, building on your comments, Eugene, does anybody else have any things that they do differently when they're communicating those expectations?
This is Zheng Yi here online. Many students ask me whether they shall use third person or first person to write an assignment. I usually encourage them to use first person. So that's one example, like I encourage them to ask before they start. And I agree with Mary a lot. I say they shall continuing writing almost every day during the course, and don't expect like they can write the perfect thing at the first. And so I said 1 page per day, and you won't actually end up like in a hectic like end of term, like they still have 3,000 words to write. So gradually they can write well, but I ask them, you know, they have 100 days with me, they shall start earlier. Thank you.
So I think that my situation, much like yours, Eugene, as well, where in business there are actually a lot of different sort of genres and disciplinary conventions that are play, and you'd write a very different looking report as a marketing report than you would as an academic report. So trying to communicate those differences, I think, is a big challenge. We do communicate some of our expectations through the learning outcomes that are associated with each course, that are specified around each assignment, around what assessment criteria will be used in order to assess the learning outcome associated with writing. And as well, I mean, for myself, I do typically include a section on my assignment descriptions that are specifications for what I'm looking for in terms of the actual layout and the design of the paper itself. I don't know that I feel that those are enormously successful in actually communicating the ideas to students around what it really looks like. So typically, I'm also providing some examples from professional writing that will give them a bit of a sense of what that might look like. Interestingly enough, the students learn very early on. Like in your program, Eugene, through their critical thinking and writing course, how to format something within the APA style and have the nice running heads and have the nice 1-inch margins on all sides and the proper spacing and the indentation and the citations. That gets emphasized very early on with them. And I think we probably communicate that style of writing quite effectively. But in business, that's actually not the style of writing that's most commonly used. And I think we probably have work to do, I think, to be equally as effective in communicating other disciplinary conventions within business writing.
One thing I do in a paper is try and actually help students in a single paper or assignment try and write for different audiences. And so within the criteria for that, I try and provide guidance. I still find it a bit of a struggle. So I have students write a paper where they do provide a synthesis and analysis of the literature. And so in that, they're drawing on their traditional academic writing expectations. But for the last half, I ask them to focus on writing as if it's a knowledge translation activity. And so they're now taking what they've written from an academic point of view and providing it as a series of recommendations. And they struggle with it, so I'm still learning how to do that. But I say things like, you can't use a quote. You can't write as if it's a literature review, so no sentence with a citation at the end of it. So I'm asking them to bring that knowledge forward into their own language. So I offer two different kind of frames of reference for what that writing style is about to help them learn how to communicate the same information in two different ways and then give them feedback on that. So things like you can't use a quote, you need to cite the sources, but you cite it at the end of the piece. So I try and help them understand how they could take academic work and reframe it for a second audience, so that they're learning that they can take it forward. My goal is that they have a way to use that knowledge leaving the course, so that they have learned how to write in a way to take it for another audience.
I think one of the interesting challenges and opportunities in the MA Leadership Program is we're team teaching, so we have 4 instructors who are assessing the students in one cohort. So we have a large conversation about expectations collectively, and then we split up into our advisee teams, and I will have a conversation with my advisee team, so typically 12 to 15 students about my particular expectations in addition to the assignment criteria and what we've outlined, and to have a conversation. So what questions do you have? What are your concerns? And just vocalize those in the group. And then we also have learning partners or learning triads where students are encouraged to share what they've learned through their assignments with each other and then actually review each other's assignments. So that's been quite helpful too, to sort of assess each other's assignments and to have that peer feedback in addition to the feedback from instructors. We also use David Kolb's experiential learning cycle for assignments. So what happened, reflecting on what happened, then connecting it to the literature or the literatures. So that could be, it could be academic papers, but it could be Indigenous knowledges, and really trying to encourage that too, that is also relevant and applicable in the context of the work, and then identifying, moving forward, what are you going to apply and what are you going to do differently? So that active experimentation piece is really important. So giving that framework has been quite helpful for students when writing, and how they choose to articulate that in their assignments will differ, but having that framework is one framework that we give to all students.
Pass this to Kelly Ann, who's going to read a couple of comments that have been coming in through the live stream. Oh, sorry. It's delayed, isn't it?
So I have a comment from Elisa Gordonier. My apologies if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. And she says, I think at times learners don't necessarily know what to do with feedback or how to apply it. So one tip I can offer is based on a recent assignment I gave for the MGM group. They were given formative feedback on an early, low-stakes assignment, and then I spent time explaining not only what the feedback meant, but strategies for adjusting it. They were then given the opportunity to submit a revised version with their own rubric explaining what they specifically changed and how they built the skills to make those changes. I saw tremendous improvement in those and later assignments.
Does anybody else want to talk about that a little bit? Because I think there's a theme that's coming through where it's sort of student involvement in their assessment and development of their assessment pieces.
One of the things that I've found with at least the science undergrads is we often make an assumption that, you know, you're 24 or 25 and you know how to give feedback and you know how to receive feedback. And at least with my experience with the science students suggests that that's really not the case. And so one of the things that we've actually found to be really helpful is to actually have somebody to come in to specifically talk about what does good feedback look like? What does bad feedback look like, right? And how you actually go about doing that. One of the things that's come out of that is students realizing that sometimes they're just not in a good place to receive feedback on something right this minute. And so, you know, that it's okay to say to somebody, you know what, I'd really like to hear your feedback, but I'd really like to hear your feedback tomorrow when I'm not quite so emotionally invested in this experience right as I am right now. And, you know, part of that process is getting to a place where you're in a good spot to have that feedback. Because if you're not, you've got no chance of trying to incorporate that into the next steps.
I just wanted to make a quick related but side point. One of the things that I've started doing with all of my assignments is the students get all of my feedback but no mark immediately. Because I don't want them to focus on the mark and then find out why they got that mark. So they get the feedback and then a couple of days later I'll give them their marks. And what I've found through that process is that the students actually focus more on the feedback. And I've had a lot fewer people come to me and go, why did I get this mark? Because they've had a couple of days to think about my feedback first, and then they get the mark and we can talk about that later. Plus I go old school and I write all over papers and things like that. So rather than using all electronic versions of stuff, or I do it electronically, but do handwriting electronically. So.
Of disconnecting the grade from the feedback, because I think exactly as Mickey's describing it here, I think a student's impulses go first to the grade, and the grade provokes an emotional response, and the emotional response in some cases can be fantastic. I don't really need to look at this feedback because I got the A- that I was hoping for, or oh my God, I'm not going to even look at this because I got a C- on this paper. So I like that as a strategy, actually, is just trying to disconnect those two functions. One is a learning function, the other is an assessment function, and when we squish them together into one, I think it can have sort of deforming effects that are maybe not possible. The other one that I just wanted to briefly mention is how feedback becomes quickly overwhelming for students, and I'm trying in my own mind to work out exactly what's the optimal amount of feedback that a student can actually receive and incorporate into their thinking. And I mean, I work in programs that is assessing the writing of many English as additional language speakers. So some of the writing skills have some struggles in multiple different areas. And in some cases, I could clearly be marking up every single sentence with a number of comments. And you can imagine just how discouraging that becomes really very quickly, and how counterproductive it is, because once you feel discouraged and overwhelmed by the amount of improvements that are required, you really stop at the ability to create strategies. So I think parsimony with respect to feedback is important as well.
You were nodding your head. I just wondered if you had anything you wanted to add to that.
No.
Okay.
These are all very much helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Mary.
I just wanted to add that I do a fairly heavy first edit the first time, and in my case I use track changes. I find it really convenient to do so, and but in the margin I use the comment feature, and all significant edits come with a comment so that the student has a learning experience of why I made that particular change. And when I get it back, I'm hoping that, they've learned from that and are not recreating the same mistake that they had the last time. And this is a bit of an aside, but I've discovered under navigation and Outlook the feature where the computer will read out loud the paper, either male voice or female voice, and I think you have some other things. And I have found that really, really helpful. If it's something like a dissertation or a thesis where you're doing that final approval and you want to make sure that you've really got it. And so I've been advising students to do that. I don't know if anybody ever does, but I do it. And you catch things that your eye doesn't catch, right? There's sometimes like this sense of things that when you're going line by line visually, you may not get, again, in terms of coherence, but you're listening differently. And then sometimes just the silly things too, like repeated phrases or something like that.
We're about 2 or 3 minutes from the end, and I'm just going to ask for a 30-second, if there was one thing you could tell other instructors or recommend other instructors do, 30 seconds, what would it be? That's a toughie. There's been a lot of themes coming up in here as I've been writing things down.
One of the biggest points is Jean's example earlier on, and Elisa's example joining us online as well. That idea of finding ways to develop the capacity of our students to be able to assess their own work and to figure out how to create strategies. So that capacity to me seems actually critical to sort of breaking a dependency on having an outside evaluator. Yeah. So thank you.
I'm just going to link back to the Writing Center because I was going back to that question about expectations, and it's like, it's for one thing for me to say that this is how something should be fixed, but so I'll say something like a vague pronoun C, and then I link to the Writing Center. So I constantly use Writing Center links as a way of communicating expectations, because then it's not just me, it's like a more universal expectation.
What to say? One of the things I'm noting more and more is how much I refer people back to their previous assignments. I noted last time in your assignment that you're doing this. I noticed it's improved, or I notice you still haven't got it. Please refer back to your previous assignment. So recognizing the developmental nature of assignments has been a helpful tip.
I think that there's great variation in terms of quality of submissions. And that, I guess my advice to other faculty members is, and your time in assessing those products will be very, very different. What might be an hour's work for you with one student can easily end up being pretty much like it could be 20 hours work on on really getting somebody else to the point where you're satisfied with the quality. And of course, it depends on what it is, if it's a thesis versus an independent study, etc. But sometimes there's no other way around it. You have to spend the time that where somehow otherwise they didn't get it otherwise.
For us, I think it's been a lot about establishing what the expectations are with some supported practice, so that they get to try something in a way that's not so risky before the sort of the big money marks wind up on the table.
I guess my tip would be beg, borrow, and steal from everyone. You know, it's just because I'm in tourism and hospitality or business, I can get terrific ideas from people from all the different areas. So, you know, take the best and pull it in, try something new that don't rest on your, you know, the standard. Benyi?
Well, I told my students assignments that doesn't equal to their learning. Their learning is, you know, much bigger than just to complete a number of assignments in my class. However, I emphasize that writing equals to deep thinking, because many of my students asking me, why don't I allow them to make a short film by their smartphone? I said, no, you still need to write down, because you know, your phone is not thinking for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think with that, we will wrap things up because I know people have places they have to be. I just wanted to come back to what Eugene was saying in terms of beg, borrow, and steal. That was really what we were hoping this session would be, is an opportunity for people to find out what other people are doing and try new things. So I hope in that respect it has provided some useful information to all of you. To the panel, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all the ideas that you've shared. We really appreciate it. And if either Joe or I can provide any further information or support, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We have our contact information. Joe, if you just want to move the slides forward one, there you go. That's how you can get in touch with us, and we would be very happy to answer any questions. May I ask that if people are interested in learning more about the resources that our panelists shared, that they can contact you directly? Is that okay? That'd be great. Okay, thank you so much. Other than that, have a great afternoon, and thank you for being here. Thanks to everybody online as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.